Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we shall be assessing the 12 days of intense military conflict between Israel and the Iranian regime, known as Operation Rising Lion, and we're also discussing the cultural war against Israel that is intensifying. And this program today I'm joined by my good friend Sharon Klaff from the Campaign for Truth. Sharon, always a pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report, and it's an absolute pleasure that you can join us today. So my most important question is, how are you and how's the Jewish community in this climate of Jew hatred that seems to be absolutely intensifying at the current time?
So thank you for inviting me again, Simon. It's always lovely to be with you. Being a Jew these days doesn't feel very great, and I think you've probably read about this in the news. You've read various articles written by Dave Rich, Jonathan Sachedoti. All these people have been writing profusely about what's going on. And I think most of the Jews that I know feel involved but very uncomfortable about where we live and how our government is dealing with what's going on in Israel, about the boycotting of selling arms to Israel, as though the whole Israeli army depends on the British government. It's not a great time to be a Jew in the United Kingdom.
But our prayers and our thoughts are very much with you and your precious community as well. So you're not alone in this battle, because we are very much engaged with you. But can you just share for us, Sharon, some of the activities that you've been up to recently? Particularly, you've been very prolific on social media regarding Campaign for Truth and standing up for Israel in what is the virtual world. Okay,
so you know that we started on social media. That's where we began our work. Warning, dare I say, about Hamas as our single point of focus when we first started. Since the 7th of October, we focused a lot on what's going on social media, monitoring, posting, sharing, and also reporting to the police stuff that we find. So very much more monitoring than organizing events. Because of social media and Zoom and so on, there are a lot of people having a lot of events, a lot of people speaking. And I think it's people are getting tired of hearing more and more people expressing opinions. So we've stepped back from that, and we're monitoring and trying to expose. And we'll talk later about the stuff that's going on.
Well, recently we had 12 days of intense military conflict between Israel and the Iranian regime, where Israel carried out a surprise preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, on the leadership of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the ballistic missiles, in which then the Iranians responded by attacking Israel with ballistic missiles. So share with us your thoughts and your assessment on what was known as Operation Rising Lion.
Okay, so I think the Israeli government must have clearly been planning this for a very long time, but it was a surprise to the world what they did. And what they accomplished in 12 days. If you think of the miracle of the Six-Day War, I think this was probably much more majestic, much more incredible, the way they dealt with it and shortened it to 12 days, because I think everybody was expecting months of warfare, of ballistic missiles coming over. The first I heard of it was when the Ramat Gan mayor made a statement that the citizens should listen to instructions, and I thought something's going to happen. And so it did. It happened that night on Friday the 13th, and the barrage came over. But Israel very quickly took control of the airways and went into action. And it's almost a miracle that they managed to destroy so many sites, so many launching sites, attack the IRGC, attack the leadership of the IRGC. I mean, I think you've heard how they came together. You've heard the story of how a Mossad agent, apparently this is what I read, a Mossad agent made a phone call. He was apparently part of the RGC leadership and made a phone call calling a meeting of all the top brass. And as soon as they arrived, they were all attacked and removed from office. So this kind of infiltration into the society, I think, is almost miraculous. It's amazing how they managed to do that.
But also the Mossad having their own military drone factory built inside Iran. And of course, when June the 13th arrived and the Israeli aircraft, military jets were flying over to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, they also then put these military drones onto trucks and then targeted the leadership of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, but also took out Iran's air defense missiles to actually protect the Israeli jets in the sky that would give Israel air superiority, which much needed in order to destroy Iran's nuclear program. I'm a big fan of the Apple series called Tehran, but I don't think even what we saw starting on June the 13th could even be in the script for Tehran, because it's just sensational and absolutely incredible. But share with your thoughts really on the courage and the bravery of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to take that decisive action to prevent the Iranian regime from acquiring nuclear weapons before it was too late, but also then to actually target Iran's ballistic missiles. And they were almost at a kind of 80% increase in capacity, which the IDF knew that if these ballistic missiles, the Iranian regime produced enough of them, then they could overwhelm Israel's defense systems, such as the Iron Sling and Israel's Arrow system, and that would pose an existential threat to Israel. So share with us the courage and the bravery taken by the Prime Minister when the rest of the Western world was basically wanting to negotiate with the Iranian regime and allow them to effectively have nuclear weapons.
Okay, so you know I'm a great fan of Bibi Netanyahu. I met him when he came to London probably nearly 3 decades ago. He gave a talk about Iran then, and I know that ever since then he's been warning about Iran's building up of a nuclear facility. And it's one of the criticisms that people launch on him, saying, well, he's been talking about it for 30 years, so what makes him attack now? Why didn't he do it before? But I think what people don't realize is how much input there is in planning something against a country like Iran that the world had built up to be this powerful force that everybody was frightened of. Everybody wanted to negotiate with them because they were too frightened of what they might do. And we were quite rightly frightened, because they did Manchester Arena, and they did Madrid, and they did Sirocco, and they did all of these attacks on the West, which is in a sense what terror does. They strike once and everybody's frightened for the next 10 years. And therefore the people drew back. But Bibi stuck with it. And what he did, but taking the courage to launch that attack, takes years and years and years of planning, not only with him, but with very high-ranking people who he could trust wouldn't talk about what they were planning, because the element of surprise was so important against a country that's so huge with all their proxies. So he had to keep it a very tight ship. Fortunately, he has a president in Trump, and I think the two of them have known each other for many years. They knew each other as young lads in America. And I think they have been talking a lot about planning this, even despite the media's idea that they were having feuds and fights and so on publicly. But I think behind the scenes they worked very, very well together.
Absolutely. But wasn't that part of the deception, though?
Yes.
Because even I've been recording programs on the Middle East Report questioning whether this second Trump term has Israel's back, particularly after President Trump visited the Middle East. He visited the Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, flew into Saudi Arabia, but snubbed Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. So it looked like Israel was being isolated, and then of course the Americans were negotiating directly with the Iranian regime over its nuclear weapons program, and the Iranians thinking that we can just push out the time for negotiations until we have a nuclear breakout. So clearly that was all part of the cover-up, that was all part of the deception that took the Iranian regime by absolute surprise, and the rest of the world. I
think Trump is a man who appoints people to do stuff for him, and he trusts them, but he has to be schooled in what needs to be done, because he's a property man, he's a businessman. So he has to be schooled about the politics of the world in a way.
So let's have a look at overview of Operation Rising Lion, and this is courtesy from our friends at the IDF.
We are at a turning point. Operation Rising Lion redefined Israel's defense. After years of the Iranian regime stating their plans to end the existence of the State of Israel, we rose up to defend our country. Our Air Force successfully struck deep inside Iran, targeting critical military and nuclear infrastructure, including the Iranian regime's ballistic missile arsenal and key nuclear sites, setting the regime's nuclear program many years back. We identified and eliminated enemy forces, including senior IRGC and Quds commanders and nuclear scientists. Their plans were stopped before they could execute them. Missile and UAV launchers prepared to fire at Israel were located and destroyed, preventing attacks before they could be launched. This operation showed the strength and the precision of the IDF's coordinated efforts across air operations, intelligence, and defense systems. Operation Rising Lion has ended, but our commitment to Israel's safety and security continues.
And we just want to salute the courage and the bravery shown by the Israeli Air Force, the pilots, also the Mossad, in carrying out one of the greatest military operations of the 21st century. Sharon, we know that Israel had strategic aims and objectives, and those were to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons capabilities, to stop them reaching nuclear breakout, where they would where the world's most dangerous regime would have the world's most dangerous weapon, also to destroy a lot of the ballistic missiles that we've seen fired at Israel recently. But showed us as well that Benjamin Netanyahu also has a heart and a passion for the Iranian people. I mean, it was called Operation Rising Lion in reference to Numbers chapter 23, which refers to a lion rising with the sun behind him, in reference to the Shah's administration prior to the Islamic Revolution in '79. And the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu made a personal plea to the Iranian people. We also saw that they attacked the Iranian state television, which was very amusing, a live broadcast in Tehran. But also they destroyed and attacked the notorious Evelyn prison as well, which sends fear into the hearts of the Iranian people. Share with us how this was not only about destroying Iran's nuclear weapons program, but it was also about liberating the people of Iran, which 80% of the Iranian people oppose the totalitarian regime of the Islamic Republic.
Okay, so we know that the Iranian people have a very ancient religion and culture. The Zoroastrians go back 2,000-3,000 years before Christ. So they're an ancient people, and they had their own religion. They were not part of the Islamic religion. But that happened because of the conquest, we know, that took place across those areas at the time. So there was always a bond between the Israeli people and the Iranian people. We have a kind of a similar warmth between us. If you meet Persian people, there's a kind of warmth about them. And I think that part of the plan to get rid of the nuclear facilities in Iran was to also instigate some sort of regime change. I think it was part of Bibi's plan, even though the protests saying no, it's not. And for many years there's been a connection. They've been talking to the people, sending messages. There've been Israelis connecting it to Iranian people online, chatting to them and so on. And I think this opportunity now is there, that if the Iranian people, if the Persian people don't rise up against the Ayatollahs who suppress them, I think it's going to be a lost opportunity, and it'll be many, many years before they can be free. And there's also the risk that they'll start building up again some sort of facility to attack Israel with. So there's going to be this ongoing tension in the area unless there is regime change. And I'm pretty sure the Israeli government and Bibi Netanyahu surely knows that.
Absolutely. And also share your thoughts, Sharon, on how the German Chancellor has pretty much summed it up very well, Operation Rising Lions, these 12 days of intense military conflict between Israel and the Iranian regime, by saying that Israel is doing the world's dirty work. Surely we know that Iran is the biggest threat on the world stage right now. They are the world's leading state sponsor of international terrorism, and with the Iranian regime having nuclear weapons, not only would it lead to the proliferation of nuclear weapons throughout the Middle East, but more dangerously, nuclear devices could be handed over to Iran's terror proxies, and we could see London, New York, Paris, Berlin, or even Jerusalem attacked with a small nuclear device, let alone the regime then having the capabilities of putting nuclear weapons onto a missile head and fire it on one of their deadly ballistic missiles and engage the world in a direct nuclear conflict. Share how really Israel has stood alone, joined later by President Trump, to defend the world, and how the West really needs to thank Israel for saving them from a nuclear holocaust.
Yes, indeed. The world needs to thank Israel. We've lost a lot of Israelis. Jews, Christians, Arabs have been dying in this fight against Iran and its proxies. So indeed the world, the Chancellor of Germany is quite correct that the world should be thanking Israel, not battling Israel, not fighting Israel, not going out on the streets, pretending to be pros, some people called Palestinian, when in fact all they're doing is enacting their anti-Semitism and their aggression against Israel. We know that Israel is the only country that could have done what they did to save the Western civilization. You and I have spoken before about the Red-Green Alliance. I think it was one of our first broadcasts that we spoke about it 8 years ago, 7-8 years ago. And I'm pretty sure that the Israeli government knows that this alliance between communism and Islamism has to be crushed. We know that the Iranian Revolution took place with the Ayatollahs working with the communists. And as soon as they came into power, they got rid of the communists. And this is what we've got to look forward to if the Iranians don't have regime change. I think that's probably one of the most important things. And the world needs to say thank you to Israel.
Absolutely. And Sharon, talking about the Red-Green Alliance, which is that alliance between the hard left and the Islamists, we're seeing pretty much that being outplayed in our own current government. Share with us your thoughts on how this government, our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, together with David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, need to understand one simple lesson. And that simple lesson is that the enemies of Israel are the enemies of the West.
Without a doubt.
But you would have thought by the actions of our Prime Minister and this government in terms of our foreign policy towards Israel, that Israel is the enemy. Just share with us how they need to understand this lesson if they are to counter that Islamist threat, or without the party then, the hard left, actually taking over this government.
Okay, so this Red-Green Alliance is very interesting because there are many components to it, but basically it's the far left, the people who believe in an international world without borders, which is what Starmer and Corbyn and all of those people are part of, and it's the right. It's the religious sects of Islam, not only the Shia but also the Sunnis. And there's the Muslim Brotherhood that's part of that. So we know that's that whole collection of people who are at the moment joining with the left, the politically left in the West, because that's their way into the West so that they can infiltrate. And they have cells around the Western world. And if Iran becomes a nuclear country, you can imagine what those cells are going to do and how they're going to be activated to attack us. So we won't have a Manchester with a man with a gun. We might have a Manchester with a man with a little weapon that's nuclear armed. And that's how serious this matter is, and this is why it needs to be stopped.
Absolutely. So let's look at this remarkable interview that Chris Mitchell from the CBN, Jerusalem Dateline, has done with the director and the founder of JNS, which stands for Jewish News Syndicate, talking about how Israel is on the front line protecting the West from Islamist forces.
Well, we're in a moment of unique crisis. I say that's certainly true for Israel, it's certainly true for the Jewish people, but I feel for the whole Western world. There is a war going on. You know, October 7th was kind of the tip of the spear of these genocidal terrorists. But what it set off in its aftermath, that was the tip-off that this is not just, another terrorist attack, another terrorist war that Israel has to deal with. This is part of a war against Western civilization. The reason why American college campuses turned into hotbeds of anti-Semitism after October 7th, with mobs of students, faculty, and administrators supporting the killers, the murderers, the people who committed mass murder, rape, torture, kidnapping, rather than the one Jewish state, the democratic Jewish state. It's because they bought into these toxic leftist ideas, these neo-Marxist constructs like critical race theory, intersectionality, settler colonialism. In American political debates, that's put down as culture war stuff. But it's not culture war stuff. It is a war on our entire culture. It's a war on the West. what's happening to the Jews is the canary in the coal mine, because it's a small part of it. The discussion right now, the debate about President Trump's efforts to rid some of our elite universities of their institutionalized anti-Semitism. It's about more than anti-Semitism. And the reason why so many of his critics, even those that acknowledge that there's a problem on campuses, are wrong, is because they're saying, oh, you're doing too much. You're not just addressing this narrow issue. You're trying to really change the way academia is constructed right now. Well, that is the problem. We have this movement, these progressives who have been on this long march through our institutions and their war is not just against Israel and the Jews. Their war is against the West. It's against Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, and all of the Western canon. And we're just the targets right now, but the target is all of Western civilization, the foundational values of the American Republic. And JNS is needed right now, just as CBN is needed, because we need people reporting the truth about this battle, telling the truth about what's at stake here. And that's why it's so important. October 7th is the wake-up call. We didn't need such a horrific, terrible, traumatic thing to awaken the world to what's going on. But in its aftermath, these enemies of the West, as well as of the Jews, show their true colors. These mobs of anti-Semites chanting for genocide, chanting for terrorism. This is the moment when we have to turn around and say no more.
And if you want to see the full interview, you can see that on CBN's YouTube page, and that is the interview with the founder and the executive director of JNS, a wonderful news agency that provides so much news about Israel and the Jewish news and gives you that right perspective on what's happening in the world today. It's certainly one of my major sources for news and information. Sharon, I just want to come back again, because I think central to this battle against Israel, as you mentioned, is this growing influence of the radical left, socialists, Marxists, communists, together with the Islamists who want to destroy Israel, but they also want to destroy the West as well. And share with us how, for example, it seems that in this nation, our government and in Europe, they've lost their moral compass because they no longer understand what good and evil is, and therefore the Islamists and the hard left are exploiting this, and we're seeing this in this country today. And so therefore it makes it harder to really fight against those forces that not only oppose Israel, but also oppose our Western democracy as well, which is our Judeo-Christian heritage.
So increasingly in the West, there are bigger and bigger Islamic societies. There's been a huge immigration into the West starting 30 years ago. So politicians in the West, and particularly here in this country and maybe France, are beholden to that electorate. So even if they didn't want to follow Islam, they have to pander to this electorate. And I think this is what Keir Starmer's doing. It's what the ladies around him do. And they know that they're a bigger force than the Jews are. The Jews are very small. I think there are about 250,000 Jews in this country. And if you take account of there being children and so on, there are not a lot of active Jews around. So, so the politicians are pandering to it. And on top of that, in the UK particularly, our politics in a mess. There's no opposition. The opposition that there is have got infighting. The Conservative Party is doing nothing. So Keir Starmer's got this huge majority, and he can do what he wants with it, basically. And so he's acting against Israel. He's decided, because of his electorate, the people he has to face, he's decided that they need to fight against Israel rather than with Israel. And in a sense, he's letting down the British people. And for me, I'm hoping that there are people outside of the metropolitan areas who are going to rise up against this. And I think I'm seeing little elements of that happening, where people are beginning to say, hey, what about us? We don't want to live that sort of life that you're bringing to us. We want to live in freedom. We want free speech. We want to be able to enjoy our lives in a Western sort of, in a Western way. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with it, because he's got this big majority Keir Starmer.
Well, he's getting increasingly unpopular, and you can see that. I'll be surprised if he's still in office come the autumn.
Who's going to come after him?
Well, that's the great question. That's also a dangerous question as well. But share with us how shameful it was of the British government, because back in 2024, when Israel was being hit twice by Iran's ballistic missiles, that the RAF based in Cyprus helped to intercept those rockets that were being fired at Israel, both in April of 2024 and even when this Labour government was elected a year ago in July of 24, they also helped Israel in October. But this time, they were determined that the British and the RAF would not get involved. Share with us how shameful that is, particularly when we've seen the destruction in places like Beersheba, Bet Yam and other residential areas where Iran's ballistic missiles deliberately targeted Israel's population centres.
I think in the past the British Army has had a relationship with America and Israel, and they've had manoeuvres together over the years, and so that was natural that they would take part in anything that went on with America in the Middle East. I think this time, I don't think the Israeli government or the Americans trusted the government to be able to be part of this action without divulging it publicly. And I think they were deliberately excluded rather than our government saying we're not going to take part. So I think Keir Starmer actually was left in the cold.
Yeah, and we saw that, didn't we, with David Lammy flying to Washington, D.C. to meet his counterpart, Marco Rubio, and talking about the need for negotiation to de-escalate the conflict. And then within a day, President Trump then orders the US Air Force then to carry out the bombing raid with those B-2 stealth bombers to target the Fordo nuclear site.
By the way, there's a video from 2015 with Marco Rubio talking about how this sort of action is going to have to take place, actually talking about what's falling out today. So he's perfectly the right foreign minister or Secretary of State for America to have at this moment. And I think he's part of the machinery that brought Trump along to take the action that he took with Israel.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent news report put together by CBN that looks at the devastation and the destruction caused by Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel, where the regime deliberately targeted Israel's population centres.
Both Israel and the U.S. hail the great victory over Iran and its nuclear program in the 12-day June war. Many Israelis are uneasy and feel there's more to be done.
Make no mistake, the IDF won big time. Big time. What we did in the last 12 days is unprecedented. It's unbelievable. It is one of the greatest victories of our country and our IDF. But the fact is that we have not completed the job.
Israeli journalist and advocate for Israel, Yosef Haddad, says the Iranian regime is proud of targeting Israeli civilians, which shows why they must be destroyed and not just weakened. Haddad spoke to CBN News at the site of the Iranian missile attack in Beersheba, in which 4 Israelis were killed around the time the ceasefire was declared. He likened the current situation to Europe at the end of World War II.
Imagine if in World War II, America and Britain and its allies said, you know what, we won, but we're not going to eliminate completely the Nazis and destroy Hitler. We're just going to keep him as weak as he is. Do you think Hitler would neglect his final solution? It's exactly what the IRGC and the Ayatollah is the same thinking, which means they're not neglecting their last solution. And their last solution is to arrive at nuclear bomb in order for them to destroy the little devil and to reach the big devil, which is the United States.
At the end of World War II, Germany surrendered unconditionally, and the Allied forces divided the country into 4 zones. German leaders and military officials were tried for war crimes at Nuremberg. The Allies also worked to change the ideology.
What we're doing here right now is actually fighting for the whole free world, for the whole Western world. And we're putting the Israeli civilians in danger doing so. Continue fighting the IRGC, eliminating the IRGC, free the Iranian people, and bring security to Israeli civilians, both Arabs and Jews.
Meanwhile, Israel police spokesman Dean Elsden says the police are working proactively to thwart Iranian attempts at drafting spies and getting information inside Israel.
We have over 23 cases of indictments for espionage, where Iranians are trying to use civilians here in Israel through financial ways, offering them money to complete seamlessly simple tasks by sending pictures, sending locations, and then it works its way up to even assassination attempts in providing information of sensitive areas.
Elsden told CBN News that Israel police are on top of it and are working to secure Israel's borders.
And we can see there the total destruction caused by Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel. And of course, just think for one moment what the Israelis went through during those 12 days. They all had to stay close to their bomb shelters. They couldn't go to work. They had COVID-19 restrictions where no more than 10 people could meet together. No one could go to work. Children couldn't go to school. The nation was paralyzed for those 12 days. And sadly, we see that there were 30 casualties from Iran's missiles, but also 3,000 injuries as well. So let's continue to keep Israel and the Jewish people in our prayers, but also the people of Iran as well. We know that now the crisis with Iran is over. Again, the international media and our politicians have shifted all that focus back onto Gaza again. As we record this program, now there's speculation that Donald Trump might be able to introduce a ceasefire that could finally see the hostages come home. But share with us, Sharon, how these horrendous accusations of crimes against humanity, genocide that's being directed against the IDF, that we're seeing from our mainstream media, we're not even checking the facts because they're relying on the Hamas propaganda. And of course, this is inflaming Jew hatred and is leading to the demonization of Israel as a nation.
Okay, so it's always heartbreaking when you see the kind of devastation that war brings. And I guess it's even more heartbreaking of what's happening in Gaza because of the way Hamas had set up their society, that Israel had no option but to bomb homes and hospitals and so on, because they were being used as part of the weaponry. And we all know they had tunnels underneath them, they had arms in hospitals, there were babies' cradles in homes with arms underneath them and trapdoors into tunnels and so on. So what the world sees is that these homes were bombed, these hospitals were bombed, not deliberately because they were homes and hospitals, but because of what was going on underneath with the tunnels and with Hamas. Of course, Hamas could have taken all those civilians and put them in the tunnels and saved them, give them some shelter, but they didn't do that because the civilians are part of the weaponry that they use. So they can dish out a propaganda tool talking about genocide, when in fact we know the ratio of civilians to combatants is very low in this war. I think it's 1-to-1 almost. It's very low. We can see that Israel has had a plan where they shift the populations before they bomb an area. And because of that plan, more Israeli soldiers actually lose their lives because Hamas is forewarned where the action is going to take place so that Israel can save these people. And this is what the world's media doesn't report on. And I know there's certain reporters who say, well, if you don't give us access to the war zone, how can we report on it? But there's enough information out there, and there are people who have been into Gaza to monitor it, so that they can actually report and not take the side of the propagandists. Because it's very clear when you watch the videos of babies being pulled out of rubble in Gaza, that this is what we call Pallywood productions. You see the devastation, and then you suddenly see a child in bright colored clothes with nice shoes on, and you might see a little bit of red paint on its cheek, and the father's crying the baby's dead, and the baby lifts its arm. So we've seen this time and again, but for some reason the world has decided that this is a genocide. But Darfur and all of these places, Rwanda, were not real genocides that they should have taken to the streets about. Clearly, the underlying part of this has to be Jew hatred. I can't think of any other reason why they would do this.
Absolutely. I know also our broadcast journalists also need to fact check before they present things as facts, saying that Israel's carrying out a genocide against the people of Gaza when we need evidence of that. And the only genocide that took place, and that was against the Israelis and foreign nationals inside Israel by Hamas on October the 7th.
That's right.
So let's have a look at this CBN news report now that shifts the focus away from Israel's conflict with Iran to back to Gaza, with the hope that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu can agree a ceasefire that will bring the remaining Israeli hostages home, but also provide much needed humanitarian relief to the residents of Gaza.
With victory in the 12-day war against Iran, both President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu feel there's momentum to end the war against Hamas in Gaza, free the remaining hostages, and work for peace across the region.
Of course, we will also have to solve the Gaza issue to defeat Hamas, but I estimate that we will achieve both tasks. But beyond that, broad regional possibilities open up. Many new opportunities have opened now as a result of this victory. Many opportunities.
Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer is in Washington today, where the Times of Israel reports the White House plans to lean on him to wrap up the war. Gazans say after numerous failed efforts to halt the war, they are ready for it to end now.
This messes with one's psyche. From time to time, you hear that there is a truce, and a little later, you hear that there is no truce. Our psyche and nerves are exhausted.
Now that Israel and the U.S. have crippled the Iranian regime's nuclear program, they don't plan to let Iran rebuild it. Trump says he would absolutely consider bombing its nuclear facilities again, and Defense Minister Israel Katz is ordering the Israeli military to come up with plans to keep derailing both Iran's nuclear and missile programs. A top Muslim cleric in Iran has issued a fatwa against both Trump and Netanyahu, which could include death, the New York Sun reports. Grand Ayatollah Nasser Makarim Shirazi says the two must pay for waging war against Allah and threatening Islam during the 12-day war. A commentator in Britain labels the fatwa a call to global terrorism. On his X account, Niak Gorbani writes, "The West must realize the Islamic Republic is not only targeting its own people, it is preparing for global violence in the name of religion." Meanwhile, the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, is under attack. It has been feeding people in Gaza while preventing Hamas from stealing the food aid, something the United Nations failed to do. Now the UN is trying to derail the GHF. As Reuters reports, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said people are being killed simply trying to feed themselves and their families. Israel and the U.S. are working to prevent the UN Security Council voting on a resolution calling for the GHF to be dissolved. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And as usual, such excellent reporting from our friends at CBN, who are doing a great job to tell Israel's narrative of what's happening in Israel and the Middle East for the Christian world. Sharon, just moving the kind of discussion on a bit to this cultural war that Israel's facing. And sadly, we know that Jew hatred has penetrated popular culture. Share with us how we are seeing, for example, music artists and others in that whole cultural entertainment sphere starting to take up their hatred against Israel.
Okay, so I think you're referring to what happened at Glastonbury on the weekend.
Yes, last week, yes.
Last weekend, yes, which was a perfect example of how artists, so-called artists, are actually taken to stages to act against Israel. Glastonbury's done it before. They've had Palestinian flags there and so on. And I don't think many Jews go there. So there's this group called Bob Vylan, which in itself should alarm people that here's a group that's trading off a very famous artist called Bob Dylan, I would imagine, to gain some fame for themselves. And I'm hoping Bob Dylan will sue them for appropriating his image in that way. What happened on that Saturday was alarming, not only because of what they were chanting, but the audience that were actually participating in it and watching it. Certainly as a Jewish person, I'm pretty sure any decent-minded person would have immediately gone back to Nazi rallies where you had these Nazis screaming from a stage and the crowd sieg-heiling and encouraging them, ordinary people in the street. And I'm just wondering how many of those people actually knew what they were actually chanting for, but they joined in en masse, and it felt very Nazi-like to me. as a person watching this, and I was incensed by it, so I went to have a look at Glastonbury, because I don't really go there. And well, I discovered a few things about Glastonbury. It's currently run by the daughter of the person who started it. Her name is Emily Evis. And she's created it almost as an activist arena as much as some sort of performing arts arena. So she's quite political, and she's for climate change. She said in 2020 when COVID was on that had she been able to hold Glastonbury, she would have supported BLM, or words to that effect. I'm not quoting her, but she would have had a platform for BLM. So there would have been artists there who were clearly anti-Semitic at the time. That's now come out 5 years later. We know that they're anti-Semitic. So she's much of an, whether she's an activist, but she promotes activism. I did a little search and I discovered that there are, although she says she's promoting alternative art, and she's brought people from the Middle East and Africa and so on, there's not a single Israeli that's appeared at Glastonbury. Not one. And I had a little Google. There are lots of Jewish rap artists, piles of them. There's a guy called Nissim Black, who's actually quite fantastic. There's Ari Lesser. There's
Lesser's great.
Yeah, there's a pile of them that she could have actually platformed. Whether you have to apply to be platformed or not, I don't know. But she could have done research and invited people like that, but she hasn't. So that tells me where Glastonbury lies. It's a little bit like some of these organizations that run summer camps against Israel where they have checkpoints and so on. Well, Glastonbury has checkpoints too. Glastonbury has a big fence around it. It has security people there. It has checkpoints. When you go in, you've got to show your ID. It has rules and regulations about climate change and plastic bottles and so on. But when they left, if you saw the mess they all left there, you wondered what kind of hypocrisy there is about climate change when they left all this rubble scattered around, 200,000 people leaving all this rubbish. So this is a woman who's promoting some sort of activism. So I'm not surprised that this man either slipped through the arena or was willfully put there to promote vile anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. The big question as well, linked to this one as well, and we'll show the extract of Bob Vylan chanting, and I think it's important for our viewers to see, chanting death to the IDF. But before we do, I remember seeing an interview with her on, I think, the BBC News actually, just before the start of Glastonbury, because there's a lot of controversy surrounding a particular band called Kneecap, and they're ultra-Irish nationalists. They constantly chant destruction of the state of Israel in their songs. They're pro-IRA. They've even called for the assassination of members of parliament as well. And she was asked, why are you giving these people a platform? And she says, well, it's important to give every artist a platform because we can bring different artists from different cultures together. But when you know that you are having artists like the vile band Kneecap, others as well like Bob Vylan, who have an agenda of hatred against Israel and the Jewish people, and you give them a platform, is disgusting. Now the difference is, I think, with Kneecap is the BBC decided not to show any of their music because that would incite and upset the viewers, but they allowed on BBC iPlayer to stream the concert being carried out by Bob Vylan. Just share with us your thoughts on how, for example, it took 5 hours for the BBC to take down these calls for genocide against the Israeli Defense Force that he was chanting at Glastonbury.
Okay, so it took me precisely half a minute to research Bob Vylan, and I discovered this is a man called Pascal Robinson Foster. He's very secretive, nobody knows his background and so on. So I'm just wondering why Miss Evis didn't research it, and I'm also wondering why the BBC, who had a program in front of them and knew that this was going to be a show that they would air, why they didn't research them. They were a support band for Kneecap, so it seems logical that this may well be another band like Kneecap to get the message across. So why didn't the BBC firstly research it? Secondly, I'm told, or I read, that Tim Davie was at Glastonbury.
Yeah, he's
and
the chairman of the BBC.
I'm presuming he was in the office with the broadcaster, that he wasn't in the audience chanting with the audience. So if he was there, and when you have a live broadcast, I understand there's a time lapse. doesn't go simultaneously with the sound. There's a little time lapse. So as soon as he saw the Palestinian flag in the background, and as soon as he saw the Heil Hitler arm going up into the air, he should have cut it straight away, and he should have just made an announcement to his audience and saying, terribly sorry, we can't show this. It would have shown him to be a man of principle, which he's clearly not. 5 hours to, not even to censor it, but to actually, it shouldn't have been broadcast. Once it broadcasts, what's the point of censoring it? Then the world should see it and see what kind of place Glastonbury's become. So there's no point in that. So I'm just wondering, you know, that I organized together with Hadar Sela of Now Camera, it used to be called BBC Watch. I organized a program, a whole program about the BBC, and we had 600 people in an audience with 5 speakers to expose the BBC and their anti-Semitism. And you can find it on our YouTube channel if you want to watch it. Nothing's changed. It's actually got worse. They've had new director generals, they've had new chiefs. Nothing's changed. The BBC's become worse. And the thing about the BBC is that it's source material for students. They're allowed to quote that in their dissertations, and it's acceptable as fact. So yeah, it's actually a very dangerous machinery. The BBC needs to be dismantled. I just want to say something about the BBC. These are obvious programs that they're broadcasting, but I for instance was watching a gardening program, and in that gardening program the gardener, I can't think of his name, who does the program, was talking about the 3,000-year-old Islamic garden. Now I ask you, why was that inserted into that program when everybody knows Islam's 1,400 years old? Why was it there? What's it meant to be doing? Source material, a guy wants to know how old is Islam, he picks up this program, he writes his dissertation, talks about Islam being 3,000 years old. You know, so what can I say?
Absolutely. So on that one as well, just share with us thoughts of how the survivors of the Nova Music Festival, the family of the hostages who are still being held by Hamas in Gaza ever since the 7th of October 2023, would actually be feeling, knowing that here we have a music artist chanting death to the IDF, and remembering that the Nova Music Festival, very similar to that of Glastonbury, where music goers were there to party and to listen to music, got attacked by Hamas on that evil day. Is there no thought or any consideration as well for the survivors of Nova?
Clearly not. I think that the Nova Musical Festival, I'd never heard of it before. The Israelis called it a party. They say we're going to a party. And from what I can understand, it's apolitical. It's there, people come there to dance and to share and to be together. They go camping, they spend like 24 hours at this party, much like Glastonbury. So it's apolitical, and they were attacked, they were killed. We've all seen videos of the IDF entering the Nova Festival and sort of going, ooh la la, look what's happening here, and they're all dead. They can't go to another music festival because they're not here. And that's those are the people who were killed, who were massacred that day. What about the people who were maimed, the people who lost their legs, the people who lost arms? We know the girl who lost her fingers. Are they going to go to a music festival? No, they're going to be excluded, and particularly so because Glastonbury has become a political entity. It's no longer a music festival. What about the people who are psychologically affected? I mean, I'm not sure whether the BBC ever tells the story of the 50, 60, 70 suicides that have taken place by the people who were either attacked or saw what was attacked and can't cope with it, including a man whose name I can't recall, who left behind a wife and a young child. He couldn't cope with his life anymore. I don't see the BBC talking about that, but they put this vile anti-Semite on, who after Glastonbury went on social media with a photograph of himself and his partner eating ice cream and mocking, saying, we're eating ice cream while you're fretting about our program. And then the next day, they put up another picture of the two of them, very dark, somber picture, where they realized they lost their agent, they lost their tour of America, and they realized that their career is probably taking a downward dive. And they were trying then to imply victimhood because they're people of color.
Yeah, I mean, well done President Trump and his administration for not allowing them to come to the United States, I think they had concerts in Chicago set up in the autumn.
Huge program.
And what have you, and all that has been cancelled now because of this incitement against the IDF and incitement to genocide. But share with us a thought as well on how this is radicalising a whole entire new generation of those who listen to the kind of terrible music of Kneecap or listen to Bob Vylan, and he clearly has done this as a publicity stunt to raise his profile as well. It's obviously backfiring, thankfully. But share with us the impact of those who are listening to this type of music and how this is kind of radicalising a new generation of young people to effectively hate Israel to this extent they're really calling for genocide against the IDF and against Israel.
So groups like Bob Vylan are the result of the Muslim Brotherhood machinery of how to infiltrate the West and propagate their program. I would advise anybody watching this program to go and Google the Team B2 report, and they can read all about it. So they're the younger generation that is bought into this propaganda. And of course, they're part of the machinery that's imparting that to not only younger people, there were older people in that audience. There were people who've been going to Glastonbury for years. And, you know, there's always been, I grew up with the hatred of Jews. I grew up with it. I always lived on the sidelines of society. I still do, in a sense, lived on the sidelines of society. I'm aware that there are people out there, even my colleagues, and I'm very aware of what they think about quietly to themselves. They are now, not my colleagues, but people are now beginning to verbalize what they feel. There's no shame in saying we dislike Jews, Jews are murderers, Jews are like Nazis. They're just saying it openly. They're writing about it. It's all over social media. You know, I just say more fool them, because they're the people who are going to suffer for it in the long run.
No, absolutely, because it brings a curse on them.
Exactly.
The Bible clearly says in Genesis 12, 1-3, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you, in reference to Abraham and the seed of Abraham, which is you, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel. And there's not one single empire or nation that has risen up against the Jewish people have actually survived. They've always been consigned to the waste bin of history.
We're still here.
And that's exactly what's going to happen to the Iranian regime.
How many millennia are we still here?
There you go. You answer that myself.
You know, we're still
answer
here.
that question. So
you know, Simon, that I said I live on the sidelines, and I know in my heart, as a Jewish person, I'm not particularly religious, but I know that the Jewish ethic is what underpins my morals and my values imparted to me by my parents, by my rabbis, by my community. Whatever they might accuse me of, and I've been accused of lots of horrible things, but I know that underneath it all, I'm underpinned by the goodness of the world, by wanting to be part of the growing of the world in a wonderful, blossoming way. And I'm just hoping that there are more people like that.
Yeah,
amongst your community as well.
But you
and that it'll be catchy.
You have God's blueprint, you have God's DNA in you, because he gave the Jewish people the law of Moses. You are the foundation of our Western civilization, because God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. But not only that, you're also the conscience of the world. So is it any wonder that every time the Jew haters hate Israel, want to do what they want to do in their own eyes, are reminded again that this is immorally wrong because of the Jewish people. And so we know that Israel is a light unto the nations. So going quick, we've run out of time. So I just really want to get your thoughts really of how Diane Abbott now has stepped into the political fray when it comes to what's happening in Gaza. So this week she actually announced, as we call this program, on Twitter, talking about the IDF. So she made a disgusting comment branding the IDF as the Jewish Defense Force. And she wrote this on X before it was removed. Beyond horrific that the Jewish Defense Force is gunning down Palestinians as they queue for food. Hashtag Gaza genocide. Again, the Israeli army is made up of Israelis that are Jewish, but also there are many Arab Israelis who are part of the IDF who defend the nation of Israel. The fact that she wanted to use Jewish as a term of a derogatory term, saying, well, Jewish people kill people, don't they? Just share with us your thoughts on her disgusting and outrageous comments.
Well, I think she's disgusting. Sorry to say that. I think she's thoroughly disgusting. I don't know how people vote for her. And she's in a Jewish area of London, in Hackney, where there's piles of very religious Jews. And I don't know if they vote for her, but she seems to win all the time. A Freudian slip, Jewish Defence Force, when it's clearly the IDF. Can the lady not read? Is she not educated? And she propagates this, and the fact that she deleted it, clearly somewhere inside her she knows that she's telling porkies, she knows that she's spreading propaganda, particularly since Colonel Kemp has been on the record amongst the food distributors saying it's not the Israeli army shooting anybody, it's Hamas over there who are shooting people for wanting food.
Absolutely. Sharon, it's always a pleasure to have you on the Middle East Report, and thank you for your excellent contribution to the programme. And just let you know that we're with you, we're standing with you, and you're not alone in this battle for Israel, but also this rising hatred against your community. And I just want to thank you for watching this programme at home. We can see really that the cultural war against Israel is intensifying. We're seeing that Jew hatred is penetrating popular culture. And it's important that we stand up against this evil and call it out for what it is, nothing but evil. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.